Welcome back, everybody, to our third episode in our startup series featuring Dr. Dan Dienowitz. We are documenting his journey as he opens his very first dental practice, and it's been a fun journey. Let me tell you, I know just from the first two episodes that if you're catching this one, you've followed them in order. You've had a little bit of a chance to get to know Dan, get to know kind of his motivation behind opening his own practice. Of course, on the last episode, we had our guest Stacy Peters from Ideal Practices on, kind of talking through some of the different things that Dan was going through into this journey. And today, we're going to take the next step and talk about one of the biggest questions I think I see people have in the Facebook world, where I kind of monitor these type of posts, and that is choosing the right location and real estate for your practice. But before we dive into that, we have a special guest who's going to help us through all of that. Dan, want to catch up with you, man. Like, how are things going? Where are you at right now in the process? And has anything crazy happened since last time we met?
Yeah, well, really exciting time right now. So the big news this past week was that permits were finally approved by the township for my space, and so my general contractor was finally able to start demolition. They ripped down walls and the ceiling and everything, so it's really happening. I'm so excited, and some time has passed between when I found the space and where we're at now, and I'm really excited to just talk to you about how we got to this point.
Yeah, it's it's a journey, right? It's from the first episode, even, which you were already started in the process from that time, but just even in this podcast series, it's been really cool to kind of see the different milestones that you're kind of checking off, going through your list that's leading up to that opening. And as we're recording this, it is in February right now, 2024. It's still weird, for me to say 2024. I'm still getting used to that. But we're right now looking at kind of a late spring, maybe summertime opening for the practice. Is that still kind of on track, Dan?
Yeah. We're hoping to be open in June or so, and right now we're working on our coming soon website, and we're going to roll out our VIP list soon for patients who are interested in getting more information about when we're going to be opening and when we're going to be scheduling. So that's the goal. It's coming up real quick. It's been about a year now since my vision call with Mike and Steven and from Ideal Practices, and the time has just flown. Just having a hell of a ride. It's been crazy and exciting and fun.
And not to put you on the spot here too much, Dan, but what is so far in this kind of past year? What's been one of the biggest things maybe you've learned, or one of the coolest moments throughout this process so far? Because obviously there's much more to come, and it's only going to get more exciting as we lead up to the day of the opening. But in this past year, it can be sometimes probably feel like a slow process because you're so excited for it. But what's maybe been something that you've learned, or just a really cool thing in the past year that you really kind of value through this process?
I've learned that there's more than 24 hours in a day. I know. I thought I was busy before I started this journey, and then I realized how much I can really squeeze out of every minute of every day, because building a startup is fun, but it's intense. And I used to have a lunch hour that I used to just kick back and and relax and scroll through Instagram. Every minute of that lunch is used focusing on the startup. In between patients, I'm writing emails, calling my contractors, calling Ideal. So just juggling everything. But you rise to the occasion. It's nuts, but you do it.
Well, one of the things we were talking about a couple weeks ago when we were meeting, and we were just for the audience here, kind of finalizing some things for Dan's brand guide for the practice, which we're really excited about. This has just been such a fun project for us. But we were talking about the location of where the practice is and kind of the community. And, we were getting prepared to kind of start, launching here in the coming month or two, some what we call like coming soon ads. And we'll talk all about that in future episodes and kind of the marketing that leads up to a practice. But we were talking about kind of the location and the area. And you were saying, you and the family might go and get some pictures or things in the area. And we touched on it a little bit in a previous episode, but Dan has settled on Voorhees, New Jersey, so like South Jersey, and that's really where we're going to discuss this step in the stage in this episode. And we brought on Mike from Ideal Practices, and Mike is specialty is helping with kind of location and real estate and getting, all of those aspects, set up for the practice. So first, Mike, I just want to say, thanks for joining us on here, and we're happy to have you on the podcast because we're excited to talk about this.
No, I'm excited for this. Dan's had a pretty awesome journey here so far, so I'm excited to get on and help to share his story here a bit. And I appreciate it. Thanks for having me, Shane.
Yeah, and so, with Dan's story, and I don't know if this is unique, and I'll let you kind of talk a little bit about this, but obviously Dan lives in North Jersey right now, and chose a location in South Jersey, so not like right around the corner from where he's currently living or anything. Talk a little bit about that decision, and Dan, I know you've kind of chatted a little bit about it in some of the previous episodes, but can you maybe touch on, Dan, what kind of went into choosing Voorhees, and maybe Mike, maybe kind of come in and talk about that location and what made it appealing for this startup pediatric practice. But Dan, let's start with you first, and what really drew you to the area.
So we, for personal reasons, we're moving down there to be more in the middle family. My family's in Jersey and my wife's in Maryland. So that brings us a little closer to each of them, and also close to Philadelphia, which I'm really excited about exploring. When it came to searching for towns, we cast a wide net, while also not wanting to have too long of a commute. Past 10 years, I've been having a hour and 20-minute commute each way, walking up the snowy hill 15 miles each way. And a priority was family time. That's the number one. Those are the first words of my mission statement for the practice. So we cast about a 30-minute radius from the town that I'm going to be living in. And ultimately, the punchline is that Voorhees, I'm so excited for it. It's an amazing community, like wonderful people, wonderful schools, and awesome, an awesome community of small businesses, and I really want to be a part of that. And that location is also going to afford me more time with my family. There'll be less time in the car, and there were so many more variables, but those are like the two striking ones for me.
And so, Mike, when he chose, ended up choosing Voorhees, talk a little bit about, that's where you all come in, and what are some of the initial things that you are looking for when a practice says, all right, I know this is the area I want to, practice in, I want to set my roots in. What's kind of the next step there, and what are some of the things that you're helping with and looking for, so that way our audience kind of knows what that process looks like? Yeah,
I mean, his journey was more than just Voorhees, right? So it really was, he mentioned like about a 30-mile radius around that area that we had started looking in first. And then obviously what do we have to do from there is narrow that down. We did that search. What we do is we pull the top opportunity areas that are around. Well, a lot of top opportunity areas that are out there may not really fit his ideal patient, may not fit his vision, may not fit where he wants to be based on like desirable areas. So we have to really dive in, narrow that down from there, dive into the patient, dive into the demographics themselves to really see who's in that market and does it fit his ideal patient. So we focus on what are called the 3Ds of demographics. We go through desirable areas, right? Into some desirable elements. Like, for example, when he moves down there and he finds a place to live where he wants to settle his family, how far does he want to drive? Does he want to be, Dan, that pajama dentist? Does he want to go in, the grocery store 11:30 at night, he's in his pajama pants and runs into a patient? Like, he's really part of the community at that point. So that's one of the D's, the desirability. The second D is the data. So then we're going through the data itself. We're going through and making sure competition data looks good, making sure areas have opportunity for him to actually enter that market. And then the third D of demographics is demographics itself. That's the people. That's when we start diving into his ideal patient and ensuring that really there is an abundance of that ideal patient there as well. So again, we started at a pretty broad area, again, down south, down in South Jersey, knowing a lot of his desirable elements that he really wanted to focus on, find those areas that have the opportunity. And there I think we started at that broad area. We went from that to, I think, 6 markets down to 4, and then eventually down to 2. And those 2 realistically overlapped. Dan, I think it was like Voorhees, Gloucester area. They really overlapped. So it was more or less a broader region that really did show a pretty solid opportunity for him, along with really aligning best for his ideal patient.
I want to give Mike a little more credit than he's giving himself. He is not just the demographics expert. He's also a therapist, and for months, Mike and I and my wife, who's been so involved in this process, we were on the phone. At one point, we were on the phone on vacation for some reason, and when my wife watches this, she's just gonna laugh. But like, how many times did she ask you, Mike? Just tell, or to say, just tell us where to live, please. Just tell us, like we can't figure this out.
Dan, that started before we started demographics. Blueprint.
Yep. It's a much longer process than just Voorhees. No, there was so much more that went into it.
Yeah. I mean, the goal really is, we got to make sure that all 3 of those align. It's not just about finding, and this is a very common question, where's the best area of opportunity? I'll go there. That's not the best path, because are you really going to be happy there? Are you going to be happy serving that community? All right, you're going to be happy treating those patients. Right now, these guys get to open their, they get to make the choices on where they are, who they see, right? Now is the time to do that. Now is the time to make those decisions. Going back to Michelle, it's family as well. It really is. It's family as well. It's where not just Dan's going to be happy practicing, but where's his family going to be happy living and really planting their roots.
And that was one thing I was going to ask, and I'm sure it's maybe somewhat of a balancing thing too. And just to summarize, everybody, those 3 Ds of demographics, desirable areas, data, demographics. But maybe talk a little bit on the demographics and partially on the data too. How much goes into, Mike, the current look of the area versus what the future of that area may look like? Because I see that question come up a lot, where people say, hey, I'm wanting to open in this area because I see a lot of young families are moving into this area, or jobs are coming into the area. It's a growing, expanding, where it may not be what it's going to be 5-10 years from now. And I'm curious what that conversation was like with Dan in that specific area, and balancing here's what it looks like now, but here's also what it maybe can look like, in the future. Is there any of those type of conversations that are happening too?
Yeah, there is. And it's I focus more on known data. Okay. So what I'm really focusing on is, how's it look today? Because that's all we can control. That's all that's actually truly known, is what does it look like at the moment? Is there opportunity for him to go into that market? Now, if there's an additional growth that's coming along with that, like there's projected growth, maybe 4, 5, 6%, something like that, that's projected in the market, or boots on the ground, Dan or the agent in the market is seeing a lot of neighborhoods going up, seeing some new build in regards to construction or commercial real estate happening around the market as well. That's great. I mean, that's awesome, right? Especially if you're seeing commercial real estate going up, that means the people are coming in, right? Because it always is going to follow the residential side of it. But it's not guaranteed, right? So if anytime you're looking at like a projected growth and there's high projected growth, that's awesome. I love that. That's the cherry on the icing on the cake, right? That's really what it is. Not even the icing. It's the cherry on the icing because it may not happen, but it may happen, right? So I always want to focus on what's the known data. Does the opportunity exist today for him to get in and enter that market and be successful? And anything on top of that is a bonus.
And with that data, because I know we talked a little bit, I think we checked the box on what made that area desirable, for Dan and Michelle and their family. Obviously not having to commute. That commute just sounded brutal, by the way, Dan. I remember when you told me that one time. It's like, I used to complain when I had like a 40-minute drive to work. Like that was, just pain for me. Now I've got, 5-minute walk down, and not even a 5-minute walk, but, a walk down the stairs to my home office most of the time. So I get that on the desirable area. On the data portion here, just to expand on that a little bit, you mentioned, competition, area of opportunity there. Is this like publicly, data that you can just pull? Is it involve, something like a Google search and just looking around the area? Like, I'm curious what goes into looking at the competition and what are some of those, key indicators that you're looking for to see if an area is oversaturated versus, has an opportunity, as you mentioned earlier, Mike.
Yeah. I mean, with demographics itself, it's all pulling, and the data itself is pulling from national sources. That's where it's coming from. So any demographic company that's out there is pulling from pretty much the same national sources that are out there to obtain the data itself. Now, from there, sometimes companies with demographics, they'll focus on population to practice ratio. We focus on population to practitioner ratio. Why? Because there could be 3 doctors in an office. There could be a multi-specialty office that has 3 pediatric doctors in it. So we want to make sure that we're focusing on how many actual practitioners are in the market. That data, and on top of that, actually, the competition itself, while we're showing how many there are and how many people there are, it's giving us a ratio, but how many of them are true competitors to him, right? And that's part of what Dan did a great job of doing as well, is getting to know a bit about who the competition is in the market on a personal level, so he knows who he's competing with. What are they accepting, right? Are they accepting Medicaid? Or are they only fee-for-service? Are they aiming towards the same type of dentistry that he is? So Dan did a really good job of kind of weeding that out as well. And that's something, especially when we get into, and this wasn't a heavily competitive market. There's definitely some good opportunity here. But when we get into like a really competitive market, it's really important to get to know who the competitors are in your market so you can differentiate that. Because sometimes those numbers do tend to look a little bit better than what we're actually looking at. And like I said, Dan did a great job of kind of weeding that out as well and getting to know his community.
Talk a little bit about that, Dan. How did you do that, and what was some of the steps there you took on kind of seeing if, your practice was going to be maybe different, or some of the things that went into it?
Yeah, so, it was a little challenging because even though I'm not across the country, I was across state. So I was not there all the time. I didn't grow up there, but I do have some friends in the area. So I was relying on, some advice from friends. I, joined all the community groups, and I'm learning a lot about the people and the families that live there. But, we mentioned the word competition, and I think, it's a funny word because, like Mike said, not everybody is my true competition because we have different practice models, but also we're competing for the, attention. The attention of certain patients. Like, it's not necessarily I'm competing with Dr. So-and-so. It's, part of what we're working on, and this ties in you, Shane, is like, marketing and showing my, the value of my practice and what we bring to the table and why it's worth it to come to us. We are, going to be a fun, high-end boutique style practice where we spend all the time necessary and then some with our patients.
Yeah. And so when you were looking through and kind of, I guess my question would be more so to follow up on that. Did you already kind of have that idea of the type of practice that you wanted to build going into this when you started looking at the area? Or did you see the area, see the competition, and then say, oh, you know what, there's there's an opportunity for me to kind of have this type of practice, and, talking more so about, what insurances maybe we're going to be in network with and not in network with. Like, does that make sense? Did you go into that with the idea already, or did it kind of form after looking at some of the demographics and data?
Yeah, for the not yet informed listeners, I didn't know a whole lot about the differences between what a fee-for-service out-of-network office was versus totally a network heavy PPO. I mean, I did. I work at a heavy PPO office, but going in, I was very open-minded, but I knew the goal was to provide a high-end experience for my patients, where I never had one foot out the door. I always wanted to, sit planted in the chair, talk to the parents, talk to the kids, and answer every single question, and then leave, even more time. So the goal was to provide that experience. And then I learned more about the business side of it and found out that, a certain model is going to work there. And then we kind of used that to help us hone in on the zones of South Jersey where that type of practice model might work. So that helped us draw towards the Voorhees community.
Yeah, awesome. So I think it's helpful, our audience, listen to what Dan said there. Kind of already knew, in your head, you kind of got to reverse engineer this a little bit, right? Is kind of have the vision of what you're wanting to build and what you're wanting to look for. And you don't necessarily need to sacrifice, to go into a specific area. If you have the opportunity to build something that you already have in mind, whether it's, whatever the model is that you're wanting to build in that type of practice, have that in mind when you start looking at the areas. Is that kind of what you recommend too, Mike? Is that make that process easier when you already know what somebody is kind of outcome or goal is for the type of practice they want to build?
Absolutely. I mean, before we even get into looking at any type of data or any areas or anything else like that, we're having that conversation first. That's the very first conversation Dan had with our team to really kick off working with Ideal Practices was a vision call, going through exactly that. The type of people that he's looking to serve, the type of impact that he's looking to make. Really from there, once we get into demographics, we need to find that area. Like, where is that going to work? Where's that vision going to actually take place, right? And grow and thrive. So, yeah, 100%. It absolutely all has to start there first before anything else can happen. Because otherwise, you're kind of reverse engineering it. And can that work? Maybe, right? Sure. But the best path is exactly that. It is determining and defining what that vision is and what you want for your practice and how you want to grow that, and then going and obtaining that from there.
And how do you all look at the area in itself as far as, okay, you can pull patients from, maybe this mile radius or from these communities? I know we talked about kind of the specific area Dan's in, the model, the practice he's going to build, and how that all worked out. But then how do you all figure that, or what's some of the data that you look at to kind of get an idea for Dan so he knows what his patient pool may look like as far as the surrounding communities too?
Yeah, I mean, we can look at a plethora of different radiuses and different drive times in and around the area. Really, we're relatively conservative with what we look at. Him as a specialist has a little bit more draw, and he can cast his net a little bit further. But when we're doing demographics, are we casting that net too wide? Not really with demographics. We want to be as conservative with it as possible and still make sure that there's lots of opportunity within that conservative area that we're looking at. So while he may be able to pull from a 5-10 mile radius, we're probably looking at a 2-3 mile radius up to a 4-5 mile radius and maybe like a 12 to 15 minute drive time. Being a little bit more conservative, knowing here it is, but you being a specialist, cast that net. When it comes to you, Shane, cast that net as far as you can, because as a specialist, people will drive further to see you.
Yeah. And Dan, I think that's something too, as you've been building this vision for what the practice is. And again, this is going to be something in future episodes we really dive into, but there's a real uniqueness to what you are, going to be bringing to the market just from the way that the practice is going to, look, to the way that, your social media is, all of that. And so was that something too that kind of, I guess helped reassure you a little bit? Is like, hey, if I can be myself, if I can get myself out there, start on social media early, the things that you've been doing, you feel like we may be even able to expand that radius a bit because of the uniqueness of what I'm trying to bring?
Yeah. Not being down there yet. I'm using, the full force of social media to really, help, with the pre-marketing. It's been very, a big relief, to just, show myself, rather than be like a character. Like, it may seem like, on my socials, I'm a bit of a character, but I promise you that's who I am. That's how I am every day. I'm a big goofball. So, that I think, I'm just trying to be authentic. And I think, that is what I'm trying to sell, air quotes sell, is just, the authentic experience that I'm your neighbor. I will always be honest with you, with your needs. And, we're trying to create a long lasting relationship with these families. We're going to be friends, we're going to live, within 10 minutes of each other. So
you're going to be the pajama dentist.
You're going to run into each other in your pajamas at the grocery store.
Going back to that, I did not want to be the pajama dentist. I originally said, to Mike, all right, let's do like between 25 and 30 minutes away from my house. Well, the best opportunity came much closer than that. And then ultimately I fell in love with the short commute. So I'm just going to have to get nicer pajamas. No more holes in the t-shirts. That's okay. My wife will be relieved with that.
So, with on the demographic side too there, because, you said the best opportunity just so happened, in that area to be the pajama dentist. What are there certain ratios? Because this is something you see people posting and talking about in the Facebook groups is, one, in this case, pediatric dentist per X number of people, right? How does that change, I guess, Mike, and maybe Dan can answer some of this too, based on what he saw, but how does that change based on where you're at, from a super dense, urban area, heavy city to maybe a smaller town in like the suburbs? Like, does that number or that ratio change? And what are some things that you're looking for in that to see whether or not there is that area of opportunity for a new practice coming in? Because I think that's a common question that many people have and they're just not sure about.
Yeah. Yes. That's the answer. Yes. Does it change? We could move 20 feet down the road and it can change, right? Because then we may be bringing in another neighborhood, right? We may be bringing in another practitioner. So no matter where you move, it's going to adjust. And that's what I really liked about his area that we looked at here, because again, it wasn't just like Voorhees, right? It was kind of Voorhees, Gloucester area that we were looking at. It was a broader market that had opportunity between both of them. Really meaning he had a bigger area of opportunity there, right? So when it came to looking for real estate and where he was going to go, especially as a specialist, positioning himself with real estate, positioning himself properly to be able to pull from as much of an area as possible, right? And he did. He positioned himself really well with that to pull from as much of this area as he could. Now, when we're looking at, where he's at, that's more, family area, things like that. Or if we were to go into downtown Philly or Manhattan or areas like that, heavily competitive markets, right? Heavily competitive markets. When it comes to that, it's not about finding like our goal ratio, for example, of either over 48,000 people to each practitioner for pediatric dentist, 5,000 kids to each practitioner for a pediatric dentist. But sometimes we may not hit that number, right? It may not be possible to hit that number. A lot of times what it comes in with that is, okay, if this is where you're going to be and you're going to open up a practice here, we need to find the best area of opportunity. It may not hit that goal, but where is the best area around here, right, for you to be able to succeed, is again, as long as it fits desirable elements and their ideal patient. So within all of those elements. But yeah, it can change no matter where we go.
Yeah, and it ended up being like a episode of House Hunters.
Yep.
once we kind of, got that, big net radius of towns, this house was, or more like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. This one's too warm, this one's too cold, and then this one's just right. And, ultimately we found the porridge that was just right.
And so that I love that. By the way, that's a great analogy. I really like that. I hope my editor can put some like little bears or Little Red Riding Hood on that for the short clip. That's good. But I want to talk about, because I know there's a story here. So I mean, I know we've really focused on the 3Ds of demographics, and I think that's so important. But when you finalize the location, right? You got the location. And this is going to be the future home of your practice. It almost, like, there was a funny story behind it, right? There's a funny story I know, Dan, you'd shared with Mike and I. Talk a little bit about that when you settled in on this spot, but kind of one of the funny stories there that's, one of these initial things, because all of this, it never goes perfectly, right? It's like you may not have had major hurdles or anything, but there's always little annoying things that may pop up here and there. And I think this is a funny story that you could share with the audience that people can relate to.
Well, yeah. So, my real estate hunt basically started, I was actually looking at the spots in July. July in New Jersey is hot as anything. And the particular day that we went on a real estate tour of all the, different locations that my awesome realtor, John, found, was, in July. So we got down there, we met him in the morning. We looked at the first spot, kind of an interesting spot. It was like a former bank. I was like, oh, that's cool, but doesn't really work for my space. Spot number 2 was like an old swimming pool sales shop, and it just didn't look great from the outside. So when we got to spot number 3, which Punchline ultimately became the place that I wanted and fell in love with, we got there. It was like 105 degrees. My poor realtor John was wearing like a dark suit just to impress me on the first day. He didn't need to do that. And we got there and nobody was there. And we we knocked on the door, went to the surrounding businesses, and unfortunately the broker on the other side of the deal just wasn't there. So we were hanging out for about an hour, and I'm a patient guy, but I was kind of losing my cool. My wife kept me, level-headed, and she's like, I know this sucks, but like, let's just, give it a chance. And eventually that person showed up. We went in, and I was in a mood. The space, I eventually realized it was great, but in the moment I was like, okay, yeah, walls, floor, okay. And it wasn't until like, the next day or two, and I was like dismissing that space, and Michelle was just like, that was a really great space, right? Like, give it a chance. Let's like look at the pictures again. And thank God I did, because I'm so excited about this space. It's like got everything I want.
So there's a lesson there, right? It's like, don't let the elements of kind of the moment or the day, sometimes good or bad, sway you too much, because like you said, you'd been waiting, it was hot out, it's just a lot kind of piled up, and that could have easily have, just ruined the whole thing for you. And then you wouldn't have this amazing space. That's why our wives are so important. All right. And as We're recording this, it's Valentine's Day. So, I hope this gets me some brownie points here, but that's why, our wives can be so important. Our spouse is because sometimes, they can disconnect, from the situation and say, like Michelle, in your case, Dan, it's like, that was a really good space, even though some of the things you were going through in that moment. So I think that's like a key lesson to learn there. It's like, hey, let's disconnect, take time to think about it. And then it ended up, here you go. It's going to be the home of your practice.
Yeah.
I mean, that's always important to have someone that can kind of take that step back and look at things from a 30,000-foot view. Because these guys, I mean, they're in it, right? They're in it. They're in the trenches, right? Whether they're looking at real estate, whether they're talking to contractors, whether they're buying real estate or buying equipment, any of the above, you have to be able to take that step back, really look at things from a 30,000-foot view and look at the big picture to know, are you making a good decision or not? So, no, Dan has a good support team there for sure.
And one kind of a question I have just around of that, the real estate, that I've always wondered, is there, in your opinion, Mike, a big difference from doing a startup and having kind of your own space? And what I mean by that is, having like an area for signage and, outside, a building. It doesn't have to be a standalone building, but just something that's kind of front facing versus like something in a medical building, right? That's like inside on the 5th floor. Like, what do you notice in that? Because I see a little mixture of all of it. And I'm just curious, if there's any one way or the other that you recommend on that, understanding, every situation's unique, of course.
Yeah. I mean, every situation is different. Every area is different as well. In some areas, being in a retail setting with a sign is very common for a dental office to go into. Some areas, it's not very common to go into your local grocery store center and see a dental office, right? 5 spaces down. More of them are going to be in either like some condo areas or the medical office buildings, things like that. So is there one that I think is truly better than the other? No. I think there's definitely opportunity in both. I think they just have different positives and different negatives. At the end of the day, you go into a medical office building, you may have a lot of complementary uses that are in a building like that you can build relationships with. They can start pulling referrals to and from, other practitioners that are in there, whether they're dental or not. When you're going into a retail space, you're not really getting relationships or building relationships and referral sources from a nail salon or a sub shop, right? That's not taking place. But what do you have? Depending on the retail center, obviously, you have typically more visibility, right? People that are going to see your sign, right? People are going to know exactly where you're at, and you may be a little bit more accessible to get to as well. So they all there's different positives, there's different negatives to each. I don't really think that there's one that's better than the other, but there may be a retail location that's much better than a medical office building. It just depends on the location itself.
Yeah. My space, yeah. No. I was going to say my space, it's in a medical office building. I'm in the back corner. There is zero visibility from the street. But it is next to a lot of, very well-known spots. I'm right across from a very well-known park in Voorhees, next to the U.S. Postal Office, next to this big, great church. So when I mention those spots, everyone's like, oh, yeah, I know exactly where you're. That's a great spot. And that made me feel so good about where, like, Mike and John got me there. It was like, oh, I didn't know the stuff going in, and thank God I had them kind of like kind of shepherding me towards that, because the actual numbers were then justified in real time.
Yeah, like landmarks in the area in a sense, or people know it's like, oh, that park, yeah, like, or that church. It's like those are great spots, great location. I'm glad, you shared that, because I know that's a common question a lot of people get. Well, now as we're kind of like, wrapping up here, Mike, what I would love to ask you, before I'll kind of summarize with Dan, but, working in this, every single day, working exclusively, with startups, if there was one or two just big pieces of advice that you would give someone, on this journey right now, starting to look at where they're going to set up, their future practice, what would a couple of those things be, or what are some of those, lookouts that they need to, be aware of, to ensure that they're, setting themselves up for success, from the very beginning?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things, and we touched on this a bit earlier, is defining who you want to be, right? And defining who you want to serve. Because I said it's very important to be able to define that, because you guys, any potential dentist that's going to want to do this gets to do that at this point. Where in an associate position, they don't get to do that. So this goes into, I'm coming back to the family side of things, and being pleased and happy with where they're going to go and in the community that you're going to serve, but defining that as much as possible on the family side of things, on where they want to more or less plant their roots. And a lot of this comes from experience with being an associate as well, as defining, who do I fit well with? Who do I work really well with? right? And that will help to be able to help to define that market where you actually want to be. Because then what do? We go find that, right? We go find exactly that market. So I think that's the biggest thing, honestly. Define who you want to be and define who you want to serve. And then from there, we'll figure that part out.
Yeah, because it's like, this is your baby, right? You're building this from the ground up. You want to do it the way you envision it. You don't want to sacrifice too much of what that vision looks like. I think that's great advice. And so now, Dan, just to kind of, close things out with you, obviously, now the demolition and those things are kind of beginning, and, we're going to be seeing the space come to life. What are you most excited for right now in kind of this next stage where you're at in this process?
Oh my God. So many things, but honestly, interior design. I'm I've been working on that. I have this, Pinterest folder for the past year of all sorts of different things that I wanted to put in the office. And we finally distilled that into a, real actual vision. And we're working on our top secret project on our feature wall that I think is going to be really unique in the guest lounge. So right now I'm working with two awesome artists to put together this really unique thing that you shall see maybe in a future episode or post.
Awesome. Yeah. I'm excited to see it. I know it's hard to keep secrets, but we're going to keep a secret for future episodes here. And
great cliffhanger there, Dan. Great cliffhanger.
Exactly. That's called a teaser in the business. You're doing it right. So, no, this was a great episode. I know a lot of people are, these are common questions that people get. It's not, dentists aren't used to, needing to look for location and real estate for starting up a practice, especially if you've never done it before. And so I know this is something that a lot of people are going to get a lot of value in. I just want to, thank Mike from Ideal Practices coming on here, sharing, their insights and tips on how they do that. And also, just want to say, this has been such a fun journey, and it's only going to get more fun as we get, leading up to. So if you haven't already, you're listening to this, be sure to subscribe to the podcast here. We are, Dental Practice Launch podcast series is going to continue on. We're going to start talking about marketing here soon and branding. We're going to start talking about different things from community events and things that are leading up to this opening. So stick around for the future episodes here, and be sure to, like I said, subscribe if you haven't already. And if you haven't got a chance to, check out the previous episodes before this, maybe you caught this one kind of in the middle of the series, go back and listen to some of the previous episodes, because there may be questions there that you have on your journey that Dan and I kind of go through and answer here in episodes 1 and 2. But I know this was a lot of fun. Dan, I know it's only going to get more fun as we keep going. And on to the next thing, and appreciate both of you guys joining us here today.
Thanks so much, Shane.
Thanks so much, Shane. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, Mike.